lesson, I'm going to combine two sections of your textbook. 8.4, which is writing and solving proportions, and 8.5, which is solving proportions using cross products. A proportion is an equation that states that two ratios are equivalent. You remember a ratio uses division to compare two numbers, and we talked about that in section 8.1. So, in our lesson today, we're going to talk about proportions that can be solved using three different methods. The first one, A, we're going to be using equivalent ratios. B, using algebra. And C, using cross products. Those three sets of terms are what you need to be familiar with, because you will see questions saying, solve this proportion using algebra. And in order to get full credit for it, you've got to show the steps to using algebra. If it says solve it using equivalent ratios, you will have to show it using that step. Now I'm going to show you how to use each of those methods. In A, we're asked to solve using equivalent ratios. Equivalent ratios is the same thing as saying mental math. You can do it in your head. Okay, so in example 1, we multiply the numerator and denominator by 6. So K is equal to 48. This is the way I want your answer to be. The variable is equal to the answer. In example 2, we notice that we multiplied 9 times 3 to get 27. So 12 times 3 is 36. So your final answer will be C is equal to 36. So that's our first method, using equivalent ratios, the same as mental math. So in B, we're going to use algebra. Use the inverse operation. And see what I have in the note here. You want to get the M by itself. You want to isolate the variable. So when the instructions say use algebra to solve, you do not use equivalent fractions. You do not use the next step in C. You use algebra. So, for example, I'm going to do the inverse operation. So I'm going to multiply each side by 36. So in this example, we can simplify before we multiply. They have a common factor of 4. So 4 goes into 36 9 times. 4 goes into 8 2 times. Now I can take 9 times 5 is 45. 1 times 2 is 2. So now we have 45 over 2. And we're going to simplify that to, is it 22 and 1/2? Yes. In example 2, I'm going to multiply each side by 12 using the algebra method. These, of course, cancel out. We have x over 1. Common factor of 3. We can also simplify again. So now I have 2 times 25 from my numerator, which is 50. 1 times 5, 5 from my denominator, x will equal 10. So in this page, we talk about two methods, using equivalent ratios and using algebra. Equivalent ratio is the same as mental math. Algebra, you use the inverse operation and you're trying to isolate the variable. In our final method, we're going to use cross products to solve a proportion. So 8 over 2 is equal to 24 over B. Cross products. Since these two ratios form a proportion, we can say 8 times B is going to equal to 2 times 24. 8B is equal to 48. Divide each side by 8. B is equal to 6. Here's our final answer. B is equal to 6. Now, using example 1 for a model, I'm going to pause the video and let you do example 2. So you'll notice in example 2, the cross products, 18 times 5 is equal to 3t. 18 times 5 is 90, is equal to 3t. We divide each side by 3. 90 divided by 3 is 30. Now, in a word problem, at maximum speed, the elevators in the Empire State Building can pass 80 floors in 45 seconds. How many floors can the elevator pass in 9 seconds? So we're going to set this word problem up with two ratios that form a proportion. So as we talked about yesterday's lesson, distance over time. So our distance in this example would be 80 floors. Over time would be 45 seconds. And we're asked, how many floors we can go in 9 seconds. Again, these are two ratios that form a proportion. So you are not given instructions to solve it any certain way. So you can solve it any way that you need to. Mentally would probably be a lot of your methods. So 16 floors in 9 seconds. So a car is another word problem that we can determine, set it up as a proportion to solve. A car travels 320 miles on 10 gallons of gas. How far can the car travel on 25 gallons of gas? I'm going to pause this, let you set it up as a proportion, and solve it. We set up our proportion. In this instance, the distance went over gallons. As you hear on TV commercials, how many miles per gallon does a car get? So we took 320 miles over 10 gallons, and we need to determine how many miles it can go on 25 gallons. So we set up the proportion. Then we reduced. We noticed that we could reduce 320 over 10 by 10. So now we have 32 over 1 is equal to x over 25. Well, then you notice 1 times 25 equals 25. So 32 times 25 equals 800 miles. Now, before you go and consider yourself done, you need to go back and make sure that that makes sense. If I can go 320 miles in 10 gallons, does 800 miles in 25 gallons seem reasonable? Yes, it does. So your answer makes sense. If your answer is 850,000 miles, no, it doesn't make sense. You need to go back and check it. In this next example, a recipe calls for 6 ounces of ice cream to serve 3 people. How much ice cream is needed for a group of 24 people? Think about this logically, how you would set it up in proportions to get your final answer. Note we set up the proportion of 6 ounces for 3 people is equal to how many ounces for 24 people? There wasn't a need to simplify because we could do it mentally. 6 times 8 is 48. 3 times 8 is 24. So your answer would be 48 ounces for 24 people. Again, look to make sure your answer makes sense. Set it up in proportions and solve it.